Spider-Man's one of the most popular superheroes of all time, but if you've never read any of his comics, then this is a video for you. Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. The first title that I'm going to recommend is actually the first comic that I ever bought because it's none other than Ultimate Spider-Man. And for me, I do think this is a great jumping on point no matter where you're at with your Spider-Man journey. I'm not as much of an idiot as I look and sound, so I understand that a lot of people know the origin story of Peter Parker, but it might be the case that you do still want something that you can follow beginning to end. This was set outside of the regular Marvel Universe continuity, so you don't have to worry about knowing what's going on in the Marvel Universe at the same time, and pretty much every major milestone that happened for Peter Parker is included somewhere in this run. It's got great art from Mark Bagley and also Stuart Immonen and David LaFuente. It's got a great sense of humour and quirky dialogue, and I just think that if you are new and you've never read anything Spider-Man before, then this is probably going to be the safest bet. I know that some people absolutely hate this, but at the end of the day, if it's going to help you get into comics, then I'm going to recommend it first because it worked for me. It's also a series that I've already talked about on this channel, so if you're still not sold on it, I'd recommend checking out that video. Next up, I'm going to be recommending something that once again is illustrated by Mark Bagley because it's Spider-Man life story. But maybe you don't want something that's going to take a significant amount of time to read and you just want something quick and easy that's going to catch you up on who Peter Parker is. This is probably going to be the best bet because Chip Zdarsky is one of those guys whose name just seems to be appearing everywhere lately, and in just 6 or so issues this manages to condense everything that's happened to Peter Parker in one book. You can easily blast through this in a weekend. It felt like Zdarsky was understanding that people may not know where Spider-Man's at, but at the same time if you already know a little bit, then this will probably help you to fill in some of those gaps, and it's just got great art throughout. This could kind of just be sold as like a refresher course on who Peter Parker is. But maybe you're watching this video and saying to yourself that you want a longer Spider-Man run that goes on for years, but you do want it to be connected to the main Marvel universe. That was an option that I did seem to miss out on me where to start Marvel Comics, so I'm going to try and rectify this now with Spider-Man Brand New Day. Now, I've said this before, but it always seems to be the case that people have to hate whatever the modern run of Spider-Man is. And then once the writer leaves, all of a sudden they miss them. Dan Slott was no exception because when this book was coming out, people really did not like this. And there's still some people who do hate it now, and maybe they do have some valid criticisms, but at the same time, this was a jumping on point for new readers. So in the wake of One More Day, they knew that they needed to bring Peter Parker back to the streets. Not as a prostitute, although that is a book that I'd probably pick up. And if you want a long run, then this definitely is the one for you. But I think if you're a new reader, maybe you're a teenager like I was when I was first getting into Spider-Man, it's worth getting something that was printed after the 2000s, and this is going to be one of the ones that I'd recommend. The art, it changes throughout the run. It's not always consistent, but there is some real high points to it, and I think it's just a great book that a lot of people would enjoy, even if it is a bit daunting when you first hear how many issues there is. But maybe you like the sound of that, but it's a bit too long for what you're looking for at the minute, then it might be a bit of a risk, and you might need to know a little bit about his rogues gallery, but I would definitely recommend Spider-Man the Gauntlet. This was basically an event that wasn't an event, and you had 4 writers who were doing 4 different series that all came together for one overarching plot. And yeah, like I said, it's difficult today to find somebody who doesn't know the origin story of Peter Parker, to know why he was bitten by a spider, to hear that his Uncle Ben was shot. And if you didn't know, well, spoilers. And even people who haven't read a Spider-Man comic before might know widely about his rogues gallery, and you just want to see him fight a bunch of them. This is exactly what the Gauntlet is. It went on for a good number of issues, but at the same time it wasn't too long. You get great appearances from Rhino, Mysterio, and it is pretty much exactly what it says on the tin. It's the comic book equivalent of the Gauntlet from Gladiators, because Spider-Man's just got to go through all these villains, and at the same time it never really feels like it is entirely connected. It's just that Peter Parker's having a really bad stretch of time when everybody's just trying to kill him. But if you are somebody who wants to go further back to the beginning, but maybe you don't really like the Silver Age style of storytelling, one that I would definitely recommend is The Untold Tales of Spider-Man. This was a title that was written by Kurt Busiek, that was released in the 90s, and it is pretty much just filling in the gaps from the 60s. So when Spider-Man was starting to find his feet and all these rogues were appearing out of nowhere, there's a load of little stories that this book tells. It's one of them as well that you can pretty much jump in and out of whenever you want, so I do think it'd be great if you don't really have the time for a full run. This was collected in omnibus. I know they also did complete collections of it, and if you do want to see his original rogues gallery in the way that they were first presented, then I think that this is going to be one of the best modern ways to do that. I say modern, but it was coming out pretty much the same time that I was born, and modern is not one thing that I feel. But this doesn't carry the weight of whatever was going on at the time. You don't have to know about the Clone Saga or Civil War lore or anything like that you might be a little bit intimidated by if you try to read another Spider-Man run. But I do think this is best of both worlds because you get to see Spider-Man when he was starting out, but if you're not really a fan of Silver Age storytelling, then you don't really have to put up with that here. However, maybe you are looking for a more classic style of Spider-Man storytelling, and that's okay because people are coming into comics looking for different things. That's why I try and make this list as robust as possible, and one that I definitely recommend from the past is Spider-Man by Roger Stern. Again, yes, you do have to understand how Spider-Man came to be, but at this point I feel like we all just know that. And after Stan Lee started off the character, I feel like this is the next major turning point for him. I haven't read everything from the Silver Age, so please do not crucify me in the comments if I'm wrong on that one. I was too busy not being born at that point. But I have read a lot of Spider-Man by Roger Stern, and it is a title that I do really enjoy. I think it's got a lot of charm and a lot of heart to it, and it's still easy to see where the influence comes from today. You also get to see the origin of characters like the Hobgoblin. It's got that great story with the Juggernaut, so a lot of what people might love about modern Spider-Man was already collected in this run by Roger Stern. But if that is a time period that you like and you don't want a massive run, I do think that you could possibly try getting into Kraven's Last Hunt. Yep, he does already have the black suit, and there are a few characters within this, and you do need to know about where he's at with Mary Jane. But this is also just a story about Kraven going after Peter Parker. It's tense, it's dark, it's atmospheric, it doesn't feel like anything that came before it, and at the time it was a really daring take for Spider-Man comics. I reviewed this last year and I did quite enjoy it. I do think it has some of those tropes that I don't really appreciate about older books, but I think at its core this is a great Spider-Man story where you get to see what makes Peter Parker a great hero. You also get to see him go up against a villain that often doesn't really get the spotlight that much, but at this point he is pretty much the main character, and there's a reason why people still talk about this story arc, and I do think it would be suitable for new readers. It's not suitable for people who are scared of rats though, because there are a lot of them in this book. Jumping back to the more modern stuff now, and for a new reader you could jump into Spider-Man by Nick Spencer. Yep, this did feature that god-awful costume in it, but at the same time we did realise that that was short-lived. And after the Dan Slott run, this book did a good enough job of resetting Peter Parker so that he could be at a more humble position. The first story arc alone was really interesting. You had some interaction with like the Sentinels and things like that, and that changes as the book goes on. Like, it really does try a few different things. It just sets up a different dynamic as well. He's back to needing a roommate, so he ends up living with Boomerang. I think as well, if you listen to the general consensus on this run, it's that it isn't good, but again, like I said, that normally just happens for whatever the current title is, and I think it's because it's so difficult now to tell a truly different Spider-Man story, but this did try its best. I don't think I'm selling this at all, but if you were a new reader that wanted to jump into the most recent completed run, you only need to know a little bit about what came before so that you can start reading this, and it is going to be collected in an omnibus. It's going to be released later this year, and you can already pre-order it from the channel sponsor, Organic Price Books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping, and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And if you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOFWOOF, ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below, and you can use these codes as many times as you like. Next up, and I said this one would be on the list, but if you want a Freaky Friday take on this character, I would definitely recommend The Superior Spider-Man. Again, written by Dan Slott, so it is part of his run if you do end up picking that up from the beginning, but you can also just jump into this because, spoiler alert, Doc Ock's consciousness is now in Peter Parker's body. And it's weird because he does still want to be a superhero, but with his way of doing things. So he is more cutthroat, he is more brutal, he doesn't really have that emotional development that Peter Parker has, and that we probably took for granted. And he's also trying to maintain Peter Parker's social life, so like I said, if you do enjoy stories where there's body swaps going on, and if you're a fan of Super Sentai, there's at least one of those episodes in every single series, this will be great for you, and you can also just have this as its own separate story to see if you do like Dan Slott's style of storytelling. The art's also fantastic in this, so it's worth checking out this book for that alone, and it was just one of those books where I was constantly wondering what was going to happen next and how there could be any kind of happy ending to this story. Now, another shorter, more self-contained run, I'm going to go with Spider-Man by Todd McFarlane. He did also do the art for David Michelinie, but I do think that that's quite continuity heavy, and you would actually need to know quite a bit going into that, and even though it's got the Venom stuff, I just don't think it's got enough to engage a new reader. Whereas when this came out, it was like a seismic shock throughout the comic book industry. If my facts are correct, this is the best-selling Spider-Man title of all time, and I'm going to guarantee that some of them were probably new readers. Anytime you see a new issue #1, it's probably going to be a good chance for a new reader to jump on, which is probably the reason why Marvel does it so often. But this pretty much was Todd McFarlane being allowed to do whatever he wants, and the art is just insane. But this knew what it was at the time, and it was created to bring new eyes to this title. Because of that and the fact that there's an amazing crossover with Wolverine, I would definitely recommend this. I haven't read it in years though, so I can't really speak to the quality of it, and maybe it's not that great now. But when I was younger, it was pretty good. As well, maybe you don't want a Spider-Man centric book, and he does appear in quite a lot of crossovers and team-ups, and the one that I would definitely recommend is the New Avengers. Okay, on the surface this might sound like a bad choice for new readers because of the fact that you would have to kinda know what happened in Avengers Disassembled, but the fact of the matter is that Spider-Man is a key component of this without really being the centre of attention. And you might prefer seeing him as part of an ensemble. Maybe you can't really stand him and find him quite annoying if he's just on his own, kinda like people with, well, me. So if there's one team book that I could recommend to you, it'd definitely be this one. It's written by Brian Michael Bendis. There's an array of great artists throughout the title. I do have one other team up that I'd mention, but I'm going to save that one for the end. Another one that I'd also recommend, even though it did prove to be quite controversial in certain parts, but it's going to be Spider-Man by J. Michael Straczynski. This also had John Romita Jr. when he was at his absolute peak of his game, and not now when everything's a little bit ooh. But for a while, this was the modern Spider-Man run that would be suggested for new readers, and with good reason. Immediately out the gate, it takes a bit of a risk with this storyline with Ezekiel, and it's going back through the history of what it means to be Spider-Man, and that was quite interesting. And then as it goes on, you have all these different crossovers. There was one that was called The Other, and yes, it does end with One More Day, which I know a lot of people don't like. I was a bit too young at the time to really hate on it, but this was another run that went on for years, and there are a lot of hidden gems of stories throughout this. The bad does often overshadow the good, so if you've heard about this and maybe you are interested in it, I'd just suggest giving it a go and seeing if it's for you. Because honestly, when it comes to comics, no matter what you love, somebody out there hates it, and will tell you constantly. Now, in my where to start videos, I normally make it a point that I don't recommend the very starting point for any character, often because of the fact that times have changed and I don't really think it's too accessible. But when it comes to Golden and Silver Age superheroes, I think the one that is still most readable today is probably Spider-Man. The only thing that I would say is that a lot of those early issues, they do like to just remind you every single issue of Spider-Man's origin story. So this isn't really a bingeable series, but if maybe you've got an issue or two in you here and there, I do think that this is something that you could pick up. And obviously, as this series develops, it just gets better and better, and I think Stan Lee really found his groove with this character. So even though I personally wouldn't recommend a lot of other Silver Age titles, I do think that if you know that you like that style, Spider-Man would probably be the best one to go to. One quick massive shout out as well, it's not a comic, but I have to give some respect to that 90s animated show. This was the reason why I love Spider-Man and wanted to start reading him in comics. So if it wasn't for this, who knows if I'd be here today. And I mean, talking about comics, not living, like it's not that extreme. And I think this is all available on Disney Plus, so maybe check out a few episodes, especially if maybe you've got a kid that you want to get into Spider-Man. I think maybe don't start them off with a comic, but start them off with this series, and then they'd be able to read some of the other picks in this list. One book that I just completely forgot to mention when I was recording, which proves that either A, I was really tired when I was doing the filming, or B, I'm just not good at this YouTube thing, is none other than Spider-Man Blue by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. This comes part of their Colours collection, where they also did Daredevil Yellow and Hulk Grey, and they also did Captain America White, but honestly I don't think I've heard anybody mention that book. But Spider-Man Blue looked at the earlier years of Peter Parker's life when he was together with Gwen Stacy, and he was also starting out as Spider-Man. Again, and it might feel like I've been saying this about a lot of books, but it is perfect if you know a little bit about Spider-Man. Maybe you know a lot about what was going on with him in the 60s, but maybe you don't want to read a full decade's worth of comics, then I think these 5 issues will be perfect for you. The art's phenomenal, which you would expect with Tim Sale. If you've read something like Batman The Long Halloween, then you already know what you're working with, and it's a really sweet book that actually has quite a sad ending, so if you're looking for something a bit different, you want something on the more emotional side of Spider-Man books, which doesn't really feel like a sentence that I'd hear many people saying, definitely be worth checking out. And I felt like I had to mention this even if it meant going back and recording some extra audio, and also because I included Yellow in Where to Start Daredevil and Grey in the Where to Start Hulk. There is another jumping on point for Peter Parker that I do think I could recommend, but it's also a great jumping on point for Miles Morales. And that brings me nicely onto the title of this book, because it is just called Spider-Man, and this was the first time that the Ultimate version of Miles Morales and the Peter Parker of the 616 came together. If you know a little bit about either character and want to start reading the other, then this is 100% the book that you need. It was only 5 issues long, and it did have a sequel. It was written by Brian Michael Bendis, so he had a great understanding of who both of those characters were, mostly because, you know, he created Miles Morales. I can't really say too much about this without spoiling the end of Ultimate Spider-Man, but for something that's short and fun, and it's quite heartwarming throughout, I definitely recommend giving this a chance. But if you're dead set on reading something that isn't Peter Parker, I definitely recommend Miles Morales The Ultimate Spider-Man. This was actually part of the Ultimate Universe, so it is set outside of that main continuity. Kind of like what I said with Ultimate Spider-Man at the beginning of this video, but if you want Miles Morales at his start, and honestly, in my opinion, pretty much at his best, it's not even that old. Like, it's quite impressive how popular Miles Morales has become already in just a decade or so. And you could read stuff like Ultimate Fallout, but I do think you'd be pretty safe just jumping into this. He has got a different power set, and at this point in the book, he did actually have a personality that was different from Peter Parker, instead of now where he's pretty much just the same character. They also do a good job of giving Miles Morales his own villains to go up against, while still respecting the rogues gallery that Peter Parker had. So you do get to see stuff like the evolution of Venom. He is quite closely attached to the Prowler storyline, and you can still easily pick this up. They're re-releasing both of these volumes, so you can pre-order them already. Like I said, organic price books, you know where to go. But again, maybe you don't want it to be connected to the Ultimate Universe, so you can just jump into the Spider-Man Miles Morales storyline. This was set after Secret Wars, so Miles Morales now was in the main 616 universe, so you do get to see him interacting with other characters like the regular Eddie Brock. He also crosses paths with Nova and the rest of Spider-Man's rogues gallery along with Peter Parker. It is still quite accessible to a new reader, so you don't have to worry if you haven't read the Ultimate Universe, and then this would help you catch up pretty quickly to where we're at today, and you could start jumping into some of his more modern runs. Another Spider-Man that I can't forget is Spider-Man 2099, but there's two runs that you can read. There's the original from the 1990s, and there was also one that was released in 2015. These were both written by Peter David, so you definitely know that you're in good hands. It is more sci-fi, it doesn't follow Peter Parker, and you also do get to see his rogues gallery evolve, or maybe just have different airs to it. And if you do like more sci-fi and futuristic stories, then don't worry, you can still jump into Spider-Man, and this is definitely where I'd recommend. Or maybe you're really interested in Ben Reilly as Spider-Man, and even though I haven't read his full run from the 90s, one that I definitely would recommend is his 2015 series that was also written by Peter David. So even if you don't know who this character is, but maybe you know you don't really want to jump into any of those other Spider-Men, this would be the title for you. It's also set in Las Vegas, so if you may be bored of seeing New York being everywhere, then give this a go. And it's mostly a story about Ben and Kane discovering who they are and why they want to continue as Spider-Man. It does feel separated from everything else, so I think it would be great if you're a completely new reader, and it's only about 7 or so years old, so it would be really accessible to a new reader, and I'd recommend checking this out. Now, my last pick, because I've been filming for over 2 hours and I am really losing my voice because I keep stuttering through everything. It's a little bit of a gimmick title. I don't really think it's massively going to help you jump into any other Spider-Man books, but I absolutely enjoyed the Astonishing Spider-Man and Wolverine that was written by Jason Aaron. This was only 6 or so issues long. It proper throws you in at the deep end with Logan and Peter just being thrown into the Savage Land. They both think they're gonna die. They both can't stand being with each other. Spider-Man is still just as annoying as he always is, and Wolverine's got as little patience as you'd probably expect. But at the end of the day, that's why we should read comics, and I don't get why people get so serious about it. Because I will also say that I would recommend pretty much anything that is going to help you get into comics. At the end of the day, this is a fantastic medium. Spider-Man's a great character. These are just the ones that I'd recommend based on what I've read, and I haven't had enough time on this earth to read absolutely every single Spider-Man comic that's ever been released. So fuck it, if you know you like Wolverine and you know you like Spider-Man, why not give this a go? And at the end of the day, just have fun with it and make sure you're reading comics that you enjoy. Don't just follow the hype, don't jump on the bandwagons. I've made that mistake so many times. So if you're just getting into comics or just getting into Spider-Man, please learn from my mistakes and just make sure that you have a great time with every single book that you read. So I'm going to leave this video here because I'm very tired. If you could do me a massive favor, share this where you can because it does really help the channel. But until next time, just make sure that you stay safe and stay mad, all you dogs. Woof woof. See you at the next video.